I do kind of believe in theatre as like an empathy creating machine. Like, and sometimes the act of being in contact with a story that's unfolding in front of you, and what theatre asks you to do, which is to relate to the main characters in the work and to feel their pain and to deeply understand their perspective. Griffin's staff are unbelievable. Like, we've gone through lots of different iterations of staffing, but the thing that's really consistent is that Griffin attracts incredibly passionate people who believe in the work very deeply and the mission of the company and the things that we accomplished over that COVID era. And I still remain so proud of. They were queer First Nations people. Of course they were. There were queer people in every culture, going back millennia.
You say that like it's so simple. That's because you're a queer person talking to a queer person.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Suzy Wrong, and this is the Here We Are podcast, where you can catch me having seriously fun chit-chats with my favorite friends in the theatre business. Today, we're shining the spotlight on Declan Greene. We speak to you from unceded Gadigal lands of the Renovation, better known by its colonial name of Sydney. This podcast is brought to you by the Here We Are app, created specifically for people who love theatre, whether you're a practitioner or an avid audience member. Here We Are is a news social media alternative that allows us to share our passions for the theatre in a digital space designed by people who devote their lives to the arts, distinct from the billionaire tech companies who clearly don't care very much. You know how much I like your work.
I love your work as well, Suzy. I'm so delighted that you asked me to have a chat with you.
I was just looking back at your time at Griffin, and you joined Griffin at the most interesting time in recent history.
Yeah, it was. I started at Griffin in February 2020, and then I think within a week, the company had to shut its doors and shut down, which I tried not to take personally. But yeah, it was a full-on learning curve.
So you had that happen, and when things started going back to normal, the company decided to shut its doors again.
Yeah. So yes, for the first 2 years I had the job, the company was periodically shut. I think I had 1 year in 2022 where we got to present a full season, and then we had the amazing news that we had received funding to do an enormous redevelopment of the theatre, which, was so overdue. Like, we love the SPW stables in its original form, and it used to be Nimrod, so it's a very important part of Australian theatre history, but it was falling apart and it didn't have an elevator, and the footprint of the building couldn't accommodate an elevator. So it also wasn't accessible to wheelchair users. So yeah, that's something that's going to change now. But yeah, it does mean that we had to move out of the space in 2024. So it's...
What's this idea about there being multiple performance spaces?
Yeah, so we're going to keep the upstairs theatre in its original shape. It's going to grow slightly in terms of the audience capacity, but the stage is basically the same shape. It's still the weird kite shape.
Iconic.
The iconically weird kite shape. And then the foyer of the venue, because it has been combined with the footprint of the house next door. So we've also pulled down the house next door and expanded a little bit, which the SB&W Foundation helped us do by purchasing that. It means that we can actually use the foyer of the theatre now as a performance space as well. So we'll be able to do like up-late readings, play readings, storytelling, stand-up. Like, it'll just be another space that we can still keep developing work in or keep activated. And then we also have a downstairs. There's going to be a downstairs in the building now, which is where the bathrooms are going to be. And there's also a rehearsal space, which can double as a performance space as well.
So many possibilities.
Yeah, it's really good. And it just, we know that space in Sydney for artists who want to make theatre, it's really limited. It's really tight. It's often really expensive. So yeah, but kind of one of our big strategies in doing this building was just actually to create a bit more space that we could give over to artists to make work.
So you moved out in 2024?
Yes.
And how long was the projection for before you'd be able to move in?
Hopefully. It will be the end of 2020, the start of 2027 that we'll be presenting work in this space again, if everything goes to schedule and remains on budget, which construction projects always do. So we'll be,
But so far, so good.
yeah, so far so good. Yeah.
And before you joined Griffin as artistic director, you were based in Melbourne.
Yes, that's right.
And we've seen your work in Sydney. It travels because it's so great. But you were a Melbourne person.
Yes.
And you shifted everything in your life. And you've now pretty much a Sydney person. Do you feel like a Sydney person?
Yes, I do. It took me a little while because there's such like weird Melbourne Sydney thing.
Rivalry.
I think I came to the city, and the terrible thing was when I first moved to Sydney, I moved into Potts Point initially because I thought that'll be great. I'll be really near to Griffin. But it actually just gave me body dysmorphia and made me hate Sydney because I was like just living in this area of these like terrified gay android men who made me feel like I was like this sentient bag of bin water that was just like rolling around on the streets. So I decided that I couldn't live in that area anymore, and I moved to the inner west, and I really love the inner west, and I've started going to the beach a little bit more. My skin doesn't really tolerate it, but I'm trying to acclimatize myself to the outdoors and all the things that are really beautiful about this city, and I'm enjoying it more.
People-wise, right? Because you've been working in Melbourne for a while. Obviously, the people around you is important to influence what you do and how you do it. So were you really terrified of kind of leaving all that support behind, going somewhere where, you don't know as many people, and do I feel like you have to start all over?
A little bit. Like, as you said, I had been doing a little bit of work in Sydney, and my work had been kind of traveling here a bit. So I felt like I kind of had a community in Sydney already, and there were theatre makers who I knew and really respected in the city, like Dino Dimitriadis, like Sheridan Harbridge, a lot of people who are working at theatre companies I was already kind of friends with, Kip Williams at STC. Like there were, I sort of already felt like I had a bit of a community here. I think the thing that was harder was a lot of my artist collaborators were Melbourne based. So, for instance, the now Tony Award-winning designer, Marg Horwell, she was a really key creative collaborator of mine. I think Marg has designed, I think maybe like 8 or 9 of my plays, either as a playwright or a director. And so, reaching out and forging new relationships with people was, that was more the thing I was nervous about, going, oh my God, I'm actually going to start again completely with all these different creative relationships. But now I found people I really like working with. And I also really like working with different people who are trying different relationships on with each production.
So it's a big life change.
Yes.
And I haven't seen a new piece of writing from you since 2021. Was it 2020? When Wake and Fright happened at Sydney Opera House. Something right. That you collaborated closely with Sarah Newman on.
Yes.
Yeah. No writing because?
I mean, I don't really have time, to be honest. That's the main thing. It's just being artistic director of Griffin it's a life-consuming job. It's 24/7, and
so you're not just doing programming and then go on holidays for 8 months.
No. It's constant. I mean, also because Griffin is a new writing company, and I direct one show for Griffin a year, but then the other really important creative part of my role is that I lead a lot of dramaturgy for most of the plays that we have in development. So I'm working with playwrights constantly and noting plays, having conversations with playwrights, overseeing script workshops and things like that. So just helping to nurture work, because I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that for a theatre company like Griffin, where nearly everything we put on stage is a completely new work that's never had a premiere by an Australian playwright, the journey for that play to get on the stage sometimes starts, it can be 5 years before an audience actually sees that work. It's slow, iterative work that requires a lot of careful holding and a lot of deep collaboration with the playwright. So that's probably what takes up a lot of my time, in addition to just directing. I also said, as soon as I took the job at Griffin, because it is a new writing company, I was like, I'm never going to write a play for Griffin. Like, I can't. Like that would just be so messed up, I think.
Oh, right.
In my opinion, to program my own work.
Right. So do you feel creatively, or maybe on a spiritual level, on a spiritual, psychological level as well, that if you stopped writing, and it was a big part of your practice and your personality, do you feel like something's missing, something's on, or something's weird, something's changed that's probably not very healthy?
I do really miss it, and it was an important creative outlet for me. But I think working with playwrights as a dramaturg kind of scratches that itch a little bit. Like the bit I really love about playwriting is the problem solving of it. I think of it like a puzzle, like you're just trying to get the pieces in the right kind of shape, in the right order. And I'm a bit of a playwright outlier as well, because the part of the process I really love is like structure and like whiteboarding and rewriting treatments and things like that over and over.
That is wild.
Yeah, I love the math of it.
Because your work is so kind of unruly.
Yeah, I think I like making containers for chaos. Like I like it to be really structured, because you can actually only really perceive chaos if it exists in tension to something that is highly structured. So whether it means that I'm trying to make a mess and then fitting it into a tight structure, or it means building a tight structure that can then be broken and everything will seep out of it.
I think that's why I love your work. Because I pretend to like chaos, but actually I need all the structure and all the order.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch some of it is actually pure chaos, it's very rarely actually an enjoyable experience at all. It does need to have some footholds for the audience through it. But that's the ideal thing to me, is that a work that feels really unpredictable and unruly and messy and chaotic. But secretly, I know that control even my entity, I'm a deep control freak. You know, how the artistic director would be coming without being a control freak.
I don't know if that's a common perception, but when about you, because I only knew you from your very naughty work. So when you were announced as the new AD at the time, I just thought this is such a great choice, because Declan's gonna make the best artistic decisions.
And then I started, and you realized,
I thought you're gonna be making really brave decisions, but I also thought, but he seems like such a everywhere all at once person. I didn't think that you were going to be a control freak and have that aspect.
Well, I mean, I'm a control freak in a particular way. It's like creatively when I'm like a director, I'm not like a dictator or anything. I like to listen to everybody, and I really like to deeply collaborate with people, especially because so much of my work is working with playwrights, and the playwright has to lead a dramaturgical process. Like you're really just kind of following them and supporting and asking questions and provoking and making suggestions, but also being ready for your suggestions to be rejected and be wrong and be okay with that. Like you sort of can't have an ego in that process. So I guess when I think about control, I guess it's again just more about like putting structures in place and planning and all that kind of stuff, less about being kind of the person who everyone has to obey or anything like that.
Aside from collaborating with writers, you've also done the, I think, quite extraordinary thing of collaborating with directors, because you directed Sex Magic with Nicholas Bell, and you directed White Feather Yellow Tree with Amy Salt.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did those how does that happen? Who do you have to convince? Who do you have to convince that they need to have two directors?
I think for something like Sex Magic, for Nick's play, there was just, as a director, there was an entire metaphysical and cultural and spiritual points that production that I did not have access to because I'm I'm not South Asian, but also I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a metaphysically minded person. And Nick is that. Over at the development process, I was having to come to Nick to consult with him on so many creative decisions and get his input. And I was following his lead on so many things. At a certain point, it just became like, we should just do this together. We should just actually direct this together. And at that point, he and I had been working on Sex Magic for about 4 years. So we knew we could do it together, and we knew we got along well enough that we could do that and could respect the boundaries of that collaboration. But all also because where I came from as a theatre maker, one of the most important creative relationships of my life, it's still one of the most important creative relationships of my life, is my collaboration with Ash Flanders as Sisters Grimm, which is like a DIY.
His name was bound to propose, as it always at some stage.
But, you know, that was like a DIY punk theatre company that he and I started over 10 years ago now. And, you know, Ash is one of my closest friends. He's also a deep collaborator of mine. And so I kind of learned how to make theatre by collaborating with another person and having a sounding board there all the time to balance decisions off. And sometimes I think that if you can enter that space of like real honesty with another theatre maker, your work gets better because you get past niceties and you just start saying, that's a terrible idea. Like, that's a really bad idea. Let's think of something else. And you challenge each other. And I think sometimes that tussle makes the work better than if it's just a lone person at the top making all the decisions.
Have you grown out of the punk of Sisters Grimm?
Yeah, I think we're both in our genteel, elder queer statesman eras now.
I don't think so.
Oh, you know, my taste is always for work that's more kind of raucous. And also, like, I'm desperate to make another Sisters Grimm show with Ash. I think I miss that more than my own solo playwriting. I really expect another show.
So what?
Really fun.
What needs to happen for that to happen?
Probably, it will probably happen after I've finished up at Griffin, I reckon. And that's my dream. I'm not like I mean, this maybe someone will use this as evidence as being later on in my life, but I don't plan on like moving to another artistic director job after this. I love working at Griffin, and Griffin's probably the only theatre company in Australia where I was really excited and thought I could make a positive contribution as a playwright, as a dramaturg.
How long did you think you were going to stay in that position?
I don't think I had a specific number in mind, but I think COVID definitely changed things a bit because they didn't feel like they were. I mean, I'm really, really proud of the work that Griffin did over the COVID era. And my God, Griffin's staff are unbelievable. Like, we've gone through lots of different iterations of staffing, but the thing that's really consistent is that Griffin attracts incredibly passionate people who believe in the work very deeply and the mission of the company. And the things that we accomplished over that COVID era, I still remain so proud of, just because we're so much smaller than the other theatre companies. So the workload is wild if you're trying to reshape entire seasons on the fly around changing COVID audience regulations. But I felt like in terms of actually getting to program a full season and stuff like that, it only really started in like 2022, 2023. So,
and then you had more further disruptions. So I keep feeling like I need things to settle down. I need things to settle down at Griffin so that Declan can do 2-3 years of just really solid, undisturbed. Well, disturbed. But disturbing. But just kind of focus on that and not have to deal with all the hullabaloo around the extra chaos there.
Yeah, I think so too. They're really good problems to have. Well, actually, COVID wasn't a good problem to have, but the redevelopment is it's such an amazing opportunity. And it's also crazy to get to be the person who gets to oversee like this new building that's going to hold new Australian writing in this country for the next 50 years.
Chaos, the chaos of COVID was terrible, but it gave rise to an incredible show. Do you know which I'm talking about?
No.
Is it called Green Park?
Oh yeah, Green Park. Yeah. That was my first show, Griffin, by Elias Jameson Brown.
Yeah. And I'll try to describe it to our listeners. So we have a very famous park near the Stables Theatre. And you did a show there with just two actors in this park, not too big, not too small. And because we had to have distance, the actors were really far away, and we were sitting in individual chairs, quite a distance from each other. And how many audience members were there each?
Oh, that was a while now. That was
it like 20, 30 people at a time?
It was more than that. I think we could get up to about 50.
Okay.
I think it felt smaller because they could be spread out across the park. But yeah.
And we all had to wear headphones.
Yes.
Right? And I think for me, that was the most pleasurable thing. Because you're like eavesdropping at those two people doing some shady business in the corner.
Yeah.
Flirting or whatever. And you could hear the intimacy of the discussion.
Yes.
And the sound, I remember the sound design was so great because even though you were shut in, there was all the traffic that were kind of manufactured in there.
That's right, yeah, which was a cool tension. It was Dave Bergen was the sound designer, and he was really conscious that, yeah, on the one hand, you have these two people on intergenerational grinder day, like a very out 19-year-old and an older man, like in his 50s, who's ostensibly straight, trying to negotiate hookup in Green Park. But then you have the reality of the park itself. So Dave Bergen, the sound designer, put speakers all through the park as well and up in the trees. So you could still hear in the background like traffic going past and the sound of people just walking through the park. Yeah, that show was like a weird little COVID gift because at that point we actually couldn't put shows on in the stables. The stables was too small, and under social distancing legislation at that point, I think we could have only had about 30 people in the venue. So yeah, it was sort of a lucky little moment of providence where we thought of a different way to do the show that would actually make the show, I think, more dynamic. Because Elias had originally written the play to be set in an apartment. It was an act of collaboration when we moved it outside, and he clearly rewrote the play to that context.
I love that so much. And I feel like it's sad that it's very unlikely to ever come back because the circumstances are so different.
Yeah, that's right. Sydney Festival brought it back the year after.
Oh, they did come back.
Yeah, it came back the year after. But yeah, well, I know one of the things that was such a bummer about it as well is that there was quite a bit of interest in touring it, but I don't know. It's so of the area. The play was called Green Park. It's specifically about the history of Green Park. Yeah, the toilet block that used to be in there and all the violence and the fact that that park in some way represents the queer history of Sydney. It was a place where people used to sleep rough, and it's across the park from the St. Vincent's Hospital. So it has this kind of history as a place of solace for the families of people who are dying of AIDS in that building. You can't just kind of pick that, show up and just drop it into another park somewhere because you're written into it.
That's right, because I didn't consciously kind of notice that, but obviously having spent a lot of time in Sydney and I didn't grow up here, but spent a lot of time in Sydney and being a queer person, that area has so much meaning.
Yeah, it does.
So because my body's in it and watching this kind of strange intergenerational hookup happening, I'm focusing on, the storytelling, but actually the resonance of the area is happening. As the action is unfolding.
Yeah, and sometimes that tension was an interesting part of the play as well. That, we had these like theater audiences who had paid whatever to come and sit and watch a play in the park. And then there were still people who were like sleeping rough and stuff, walking through it, or wanting to come up. And we had like spare sets of headphones and stuff like that for anybody who just wanted to like hang out and watch the play. They could just like put headphones on and just sit and
I can't tell you how magical it is to see two, professional performers, well rehearsed, and they're just random strangers crossing.
Yes.
And sometimes just kind of really slowly trying to figure out what the hell is happening. Because we're so far away, some of them didn't notice that there was an audience.
Totally. And also one of the performers, Stephen Lark and Slim, I think is, as soon as we settled into the season, the performers knew what they're doing. I felt like he was like trying to like get other people to interact as well. I think he was like looking for the thrill of destabilizing the show, or like not destabilizing, but like he was sort of inviting the chaos of the park into the show a little bit, which was kind of great.
Which is the great spirit of live theater.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
And another thing that I really love that you worked on, White Fella Yellow Tree, is returning.
Yes.
I am so thrilled that it's coming back and looks like it's going to get a larger audience this time.
Yeah, that's right. Going from the stables, which is just 100 seats, to Wharf 1 at Sydney Theatre. Yeah, it's really exciting and like especially great for Dylan as well, Dylan Vandenberg, the playwright, who, I mean, I just think Dylan's such a phenomenal...
It's a phenomenal piece of writing.
Yeah, it is.
It's very controversial.
Is it?
I think it is. And from what I hear through the grapevine, I don't know how much of it is true. Because it's trying to talk about queer Indigenous people from the past, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that Dylan does with his work a lot. Like, he's interested in the gaps, like the unrecorded gaps in Black history. and creating works that responds to or create a spirit of like mythical invention inside those spaces. So it's not that there's a ton of historical records around queer Black history that can be drawn from, certainly like in a pre-colonial sense, but like there were queer First Nations people. Of course they were. There were queer people in every culture going back millennia.
You say that like it's so simple. That's because you're a queer person talking to a queer person.
Yes. Yeah. But even like in recorded history, there are so many, like, I mean, there's an amazing, do you listen to the podcast Bad Gays?
No.
Oh my God, you would love it. Sorry to plug another podcast. But yeah, it's a podcast about queer and complicated people from queer history, and like it goes back like thousands of years sometimes to instances of people who completely lived outside expected gender and sexual norms. And I guess by expected, I mean contemporary expected. There weren't words for queerness or homosexuality or transness in those historical contexts, but we know that people lived those lives in those times, and in very specific social contexts, some of which encouraged and nurtured those identities, and some contexts that didn't. But yeah, like there's no like completely codified idea of what First Nations queerness was historically. But I think Dylan has written a version of this.
Yeah.
And I think it's like incredibly beautiful, but also really complex.
Yeah. When I was watching it, I felt like, oh, there are going to be people who are going to be upset. Because it looks a little bit like a factual historical drama. But then at the same time, oh, it can't be factual. But then I'm also thinking, some people are just going to be pissed off that we are saying that there were gay men at the dawn of colonialism on these lands. Have you heard anything from indigenous communities that might be might feel like that wasn't the right representation?
No.
Okay, good.
No. I mean, no, it'd be only positive, like encouraging stuff from the audience who came to see it, both First Nations and non-First Nations.
I think I was subject to fake news at that, because I was told an interesting story about how there were indigenous people from different places, different countries or tribes that were kind of arguing about the representation of queerness from that time.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's no I'm sure there's debate about that, just like there are in so many different communities where people have different stakes in history and putting forward a specific version of what is considered to be historical accuracy that aligns with their own values. I also don't think Dylan in this play is, it's not a biographical play. It's not saying this is a historically accurate snapshot of two specific young men at this time in history. I mean, even the production, I think, they're both wearing contemporary clothes, and the two young men speak just like any young men now. It's definitely not something I think that we were trying to create a flame of like, a highbrow historical, this is exactly how it was. I think it's a story that's been invented to fill a gap, and it's very much something from Dylan's imagination, but also something that's both deeply felt and deeply researched.
I wonder if it's because there's so few stories of that nature in terms of the timeline.
Yeah.
And because often in a vacuum, things suddenly become like the only information you have.
Totally.
And you interpret it in a way that's that might not be completely adhering to what the intention was of the creators. But more importantly, my question about that show is, it's so much about decolonization. And at this wonderful intersection of indigenous identities and queer identities. And I feel like you are very engaged in decolonization. in general. Not only Griffin, but in your life. And your life's work, I would say. Yeah. How much of that informs your decisions as an AD?
I think that at Griffin, because we only do new Australian writing, I think that there's a kind of responsibility that is really deeply felt, not just by myself, but within the whole staff of the company and with the other artists that I program every season with. Andrea James, Cassie Hamilton, up to recently Lila Enright, and now Emily David. Like, we have to offer a picture of what Australian writing looks like and a picture of what Australia looks like. It's just such a unique responsibility for Griffin, because every single other theatre company in this country programs international work. They aren't purely engaged with one country's artistic and cultural identity. So I think that question of like cultural plurality and giving a snapshot of the full breadth of stories that exist on this land, that's the kind of approach that we all kind of try and bring to the programming table. And yeah, that informs everything and a lot of the conversations that we have with writers as well, because obviously we want to make sure that those works have been developed like 4 or 5 years before they eventually make it to the stage. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm thinking as well about how much of the way that you're looking at this section, how much does it take into account what other people are doing? Do you know what I mean?
Like other theatre companies?
Yeah. So like if there is an overrepresentation of some stuff, some parts of our life out there, does that mean that you are intentionally not doing that stuff?
That's a really good question. I guess I try not to be too reactive to what other theatre companies are doing. Also, we sort of can't be, because the tail on our work is so long as well. So I mean, there was a period a few years ago where a lot of theatre companies were suddenly responding to this pendulum swing where adaptations of canonical work, like adaptations of Shakespeare and Ibsen and stuff like that, were occupying a lot of space on our stages. And the pendulum swung in the opposite direction, and suddenly new writing had a lot more currency. And that was an interesting moment for Griffin, because it was like, oh, in that previous time, we were the ones who were reactive and doing a lot of the new writing, and the theatre companies weren't. I should say original new writing. Adaptations are still new writing. So does that mean we have to like radically change what we do or whatever? But I also think that the promise of Griffin is just that there will always be a space in Australia for new writing. Like, we don't have to rearrange that, or the type of new writing might change a little bit, but I think it needs to be kind of an island of sanctuary for playwrights and for audiences that are seeking new writing, not a place that reinvents itself as soon as the other. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Also, part of the superpower of Griffin is its size as well. We're so small, so we can take risks on plays that the theatre companies can't. Like the theatre companies that have to sell many, many more tickets per night than we do. And I always love it when a playwright, especially if they're doing something really risky or feral or strange on the Griffin stage, then goes and gets a commission or something from a larger theatre company. I think that's really cool, because that means that Griffin, in some sense, has succeeded in its mission for being like a testing ground or a theatre for new chances. It means that playwright has had an opportunity that they wouldn't have had if Griffin hadn't been around.
Does that mean that you don't have a hunger for a really high budget show?
I mean, a high budget show is like, it's even a weird scale with a theatre as small as Griffin's. Like, I guess you could say that like something like Nick Brown's play Sex Magic, that was a very high budget show for Griffin. And that was high budget because we Sydney World Pride made that possible. They came on board and partnered with us, which meant that we had a bigger budget for that show. But like, I don't know, like Sex Magic still costs like not very much compared to some of the other shows that go on with bigger theatre companies, even low budget shows for those theatre companies. I like spectacle sometimes. I think that can be really fun, but spectacle doesn't always have to be high budget.
Okay.
You can do, like, my definition of spectacle is just the moment where something happens in a theatre that the audience didn't think was possible. And you can really do that with very little money. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we need to talk about 2026.
Yeah.
I have brought you in as the only way for me to find out what's happening next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me some of the highlights.
Oh my God. Well, we're doing, I guess one of the really big things about next year is that Griffin are going to be in residence at Belvoir next year. So we are doing 4 of our shows for our main season, either downstairs theatre at Belvoir, and our 2 Griffin Look At shows, which is our program that supports independent theatre makers, also in the downstairs theatre, and we're doing 1 show in the upstairs theatre next year.
Is that your show upstairs?
It is. It is one of my shows upstairs.
What is that?
That's right. The work we're doing upstairs is it's an adaptation of the Kenneth Cook novel Wake in Fright. An adaptation I did with the performer and my co-creator Zara Newman. And 1-person adaptation we did of that work a few years ago.
Is it going to be quite close to the staging of it at the Opera House?
Yes.
Years ago?
Yes. Yeah. I think so. So it's a very kind of like dark gothic adaptation of the work that's designed to be hopefully really thrilling and nail-biting and scary, because I love horror in theatre, and I think it's probably the thing that I've made along with Zara that's kind of the closest to an experience of horror in theatre.
You've had a huge runaway hit this year with Sistren.
Yes, by Elocution.
Yeah. And is that do you say a lookout program?
Yes. So Sistren this year at the which was produced as part of our Lookout season. It had its premiere at the Old Fitz this year.
Yes.
It's a Green Door Theatre production. Iolanthe wrote it. It's starring Iolanthe and Janet Anderson, and it's this like chaotic, beautiful look at friendship between these 2 incredible teenage dears in their London high school.
Yeah. One who's a young woman of color, and one who's a trans woman.
Yes, that's right.
And the show just brings the house down.
It's so
every
funny.
single time.
I keep saying to people, it's also probably the first show I've ever really seen that made me feel old. I don't know if you have that experience, but I was like, because the show is so like codified through memes and a particular, like a very Gen Z lens.
Yeah.
I was watching it going, it's happened.
It's happened for me several times, so that wasn't the first time, but I could definitely see where they're coming from. But that show, even though it was kind of writing from that perspective of teenagers, and it almost wants to address the audience as that way, which makes it really interesting, because not many of us were teenagers in that crowd, but it spoke to us. I think it spoke to everyone. It felt like everyone was responding in a really like visceral, big way.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think especially for older generations, Gen Z sometimes got a really rough rap. There's this like expectation that being hyper net literate or hyper social media literate is vacuous or something like that. But that's one of the things I adore about this play. I mean, I think it's such a brilliant piece of writing. And man, talk about like chaos contained within structure. I think that show is such a smart realization of that. But it's like, yeah, it's both this kind of really chaotic, internet-y, meme-centered aesthetic, but grounded with this like deep critical intelligence. Like the conversations that happen between the 2 women in that work around the conflicts in their identity and their position in the world, and moments they've failed each other as allies, and moments they hurt each other deeply, how they wrestle with that in the work. Yeah, it's so intelligent. And
those scenes where they were kind of confronting each other, having those interrogations that were very difficult, became the most inclusive part of the show, I think.
Absolutely, totally.
Yeah, because there's a lot of the fun stuff you're kind of observing outside of how what youth looks like, or how youth used to look like. But when they were, I guess that's when they became serious.
Yes.
Yeah, they kind of dropped the fun stuff, the hang out and play stuff, and had really serious conversations from really, really deep personal places of hurt.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I agree there is a kind of like the deep love and hurt that those two young women feel for each other in the work. I agree. I think it's something that really pulls the audience in because you love the two of them so much.
Yeah.
Like
Suddenly becomes universal.
yeah, I think so.
That's the power of it. Often something can look so niche, and then somehow it speaks to everyone.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the magical moments. So when it returns next year.
Yes, yeah, we are bringing it back. We're bringing it back as other main season next year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hopefully with the same cast.
With exactly the same cast.
Right.
Yes, that's right. We're really excited about that.
Well,
so what else? We're starting the year with a work that I'm directing. It's a revival of the Steve J. Spears play, The Elocution of Benjamin Franklin, on the 50th anniversary of the play. And we're actually performing it in the same theatre, the Downstairs Theatre at Belvoir, where the play originally premiered.
was that Australian work?
Yes. Oh. Yes. Yeah, that's right. And The Elocution of Benjamin Franklin is this like pretty legendary piece of Australian writing. It's about this incredibly funny, wild, pompous voice teacher named Richard O'Brien, who engages in this kind of fantasy by night, where he cross-dresses and has elaborate fantasies about Mick Jagger, and but keeps that side of himself very under lock and key because it's the 1970s and there is so much aggression against queer people.
Where's it set?
It's set in Toorak in Melbourne.
Oh.
Yeah. And then he gets this very precocious young voice student who starts seeing him, and the ire and hackles of his neighbours starts being raised, and what you watch is this kind of like tragic disintegration of this man. And it's a one-person show, this towering wild role, and Simon Burke will be playing it, which I think is going to be pretty phenomenal.
I think so.
Of his caliber.
So you're basically looking at queer history.
Exactly, yeah, and it's a really, I think, important play in Australia's queer theatre history. I mean, even just in terms of representing a queer character, when the work was originally premiering is kind of wild, and also making him a hero, even if he isn't a work, kind of a tragic hero. Yeah. So that's the show that's going to be starting the season. We're also doing a new play by the playwright Happy Fararan, a play called Saviour that she's been working on for an incredibly long time. And it's a work that's based on Happy's own experiences of starting and running an anti-corruption NGO in the Philippines when she was in her 20s. She's an incredibly overachieving playwright. So she's written this play about a typhoon that hits the Philippines, and a big American NGO called Saviour that swoops in to lead the disaster relief. And it's kind of about the tension between a young Filipino project officer named Michelle trying to do the best thing for her community, while slowly making more and more compromises towards her American corporate overlords to get what her community needs.
Does the ambition scare you?
And that was,
when you take on, because that's not the only work that is of that scale.
Yeah.
You often get, people telling really, really huge stories.
Yeah. I mean, Happy's a really smart playwright, and in terms of the scale of the work, it's still, the play's going to fit in Downstairs Belvoir. Most of it's set in like a 5-star hotel room in Manila that has been set up as a war room by this kind of big NGO. But that's one of the things that really excites me, is a play with a small footprint that has huge ideas in it. And this play is, it's really about international aid as a form of controlling a culture. Like super complex. Super complex. And also the fact that Happy knows a bit about this from being on the ground, I think gives it a really unique perspective. It's also a comedy. Like, it's funny. It's funny. We describe it as like, it's almost like Utopia meets The White Lotus.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay.
So we are doing that play. Oh my God, I'm completely out of order. So now I'm like, wait, what else are we doing? Oh, we're also doing a play called Mum Club by Georgia Gillis. Georgia is a Yuan playwright. And the play is about this young Yuan woman named Sadie who moves to Sydney very far from her family and community after recently giving birth. She's like not holding it together, not sleeping, barely having time to eat. And so she joins this Marrickville Inner West Mum Club looking for community and sanctuary. But what she actually finds is a lot of people obsessed with anti-vaxxing and milk lattes and a lot of raised eyebrow kind of judgment of each other's mothering techniques. So yeah, it's sort of about, I guess, kind of the compromises that some people have to make to find community. But also like just a very funny satire of.
It sounds hilarious.
Yeah. Every bubble in it comes true. That's directed by Shari Evans.
Oh, wonderful! She's coming back.
She's coming back. It's also starring Miranda Tatzel.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like comic powerhouse with Elocution
Downstairs
as well. Yes.
Oh, it's gonna sell out in flesh.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. I really wrote that I've left to play out. I'm sorry, that's secret stuff. I think that's all the plays in the main season.
Okay.
And then in the Lookout season, we are doing 2 plays. And these are plays by independent theatre companies. And the program's sort of designed to shepherd and support the next generation of Australian theatre. And one of the plays is Elocution by Eric Jung. Which has been produced by Essential Theatre. It's a play about a young woman named Claudia who's perpetually jobless and then gets a new gig from Main Po, the goddess of oblivion. She gets given this job erasing the memories of the living, which she then starts to interfere with the memories of her her friends and family.
Oh, but it's presented as an Australian story.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's set in Australia. It's just that it involves a Chinese goddess. Yeah. That's right. And then we are doing a work called Afterglow by Shiana Russell and Lillian Hearn, which is a really beautiful work set in the world of barbershop quartets about this kind of blossoming kind of trans queer romance between 2 members of a barbershop quartet, and how the 2 of them change over years and slowly outgrow the world that they love, how they negotiate that.
They wrote a song?
Yes, it's actually, there's a lot of barbershop actually in it. It's kind of, almost a musical, but also, the writers are really kind of have emerged from the world of barbershop and are kind of exquisitely brilliant as composers in that form. So the work will be following that.
That's also exciting. Are you exhausted? I'm exhausted.
No, I'm really energized. I'm like wildly excited by next year. I think it's like it's a season where I mean, we've done some like really big shows while we haven't had our theatre. We've sort of taken advantage of that and done things that for Griffin are massive. Like we did the Flat Earthers musical with the Haze. We did Ellen Van Even's play Swim at Carriage Works. Like big kind of shows you could never do in the stables. But next year, I think we're all really excited about just kind of getting back to the roots of Griffin, which is just that extreme intimacy you get when you're at the SBW stables. Like the actors being so close, you could kind of reach out and you don't reach out and touch them. Please don't. But yeah, just that like extreme intimacy in the way that when you're watching an actor do something really extraordinary, you just feel it in your body in a different way. Yeah. And I think having actors like Janet Anderson and Zara Newman and Sun Burke and Miranda Tatzel and Alanti and like
Star-studded.
It totally. Like, I think it's getting to see those actors and their craft of what they can accomplish with a really great script up close is pretty exciting.
But the next ticket that's coming up for you would be White Fella Yellow Tree, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
What's the dates for that show?
Oh my God, you can't ask me that. Wait, have you got Post? Can I do that? And there they are. There's the date. Right here.
It's coming very, very soon.
Okay. Yeah. Those rehearsals for it next week. Amy Soul and I go and rehearse.
Isn't it 2 new actors, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Both of them were
Joseph Oldhouse and Danny Howard.
Yeah. I'm so excited. That show meant so much to me.
I'm glad. Yeah, I think it meant a lot to a lot of people. It was also funny that it kind of, the original production sort of happened at the same time as Heartstopper. So it was like this moment where there were these kind of, at least if you were in a particularly niche world of Sydney theatre going, there was like these 2 plays about like queer coming of age at the same time, except in our one, like
not sanitized.
Our ones don't take the entire play to make out. But like or to hook up with each other. They're yeah, I think it's maybe slightly more accurate version.
Yeah,
Teenage.
highly recommend it. I was obviously delighted that it's got a second life, but I was so surprised as well because I felt like it was it felt so niche to me.
Yeah.
It felt it felt like I love this, but I love this because people don't care in general. And you think that because people don't care, then it's not gonna go to a wider audience, but no, it is.
Even sometimes, I mean, I'm the last person who wants to wax lyrical about like the power of theatre and like those over emphatic kind of ways we talk about sometimes. But I do kind of believe in theatre as like an empathy creating machine, like, and sometimes the act of being in contact with a story that's unfolding in front of you, and what theatre asks you to do, which is to relate to the main characters in the work and to feel their pain and to deeply understand their perspective. If it's good writing, which White Valley Yellow Tree really is, I think it can sometimes have, I don't think you can completely change someone's mind or change their perspective, but I think it can kind of plant the seed of some kind of greater fruition. And I think that would have been people who left White Valley Yellow Tree, I would like to think, with a really different perspective about queerness or queer history on this land. And I think if that happens, then yeah, it does speak to a kind of like higher purpose for work like that. I also remember there was this time, I tell this story a lot. I think the most meaningful piece of theatre I ever saw was La Cage aux Folles on Broadway. Just like the big glitzy musical. And I think it was truly meaningful and transformative, that performance I saw, because the show was selling really badly. So me and all the other people there who were seeing were just the people who could afford to pay the like wildly discounted tickets to see it, which meant there were a lot of just like, I'm going to guess a lot of just kind of like Midwestern tourists who didn't have a ton of money sitting in that room. And a lot of people who were looking around the room, I was like, I don't even think you know what you're seeing or why you've come to see this show. I think you just came to see it because it was poor, not because you like queer people. And I kind of suspect maybe a lot of you don't like queer people. And then by the end of the show, like, to see that narrative around the heroed queer people and where the central relationship in the work was a loving, deep relationship between two queer people, and the villains of the work were the straight people. Like, to see people on their feet giving that a standing ovation, I was like, I think this play actually like fundamentally altered the perception of some of the people in this audience. So I think this was truly meaningful theatre, even if you go like, well, it's just like a big silly musical. I think sometimes context can do that.
Well, Declan Greene, you always create truly meaningful work.
Thank you, Steve.
And it's the perfect place to end our discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.